Pandemonium has broken out here on Elvis Presley Boulevard in Memphis. Thousands of fans from all over the country are converging on Graceland, trying to get in to view the body of the 42-year-old king of rock and roll.
At Elvis Presley's funeral, James Brown stood by the casket and noticed something that shook him to his core. For decades, he stayed silent, haunted by what he'd seen.
Well, soul has no color, has no barrier. Good friend of mine, brother Elvis Presley, who nobody say, I know Elvis.
But at 73, he finally broke his silence, ready to reveal the truth the world was never meant to hear. What did James Brown witness that day, and why was it hidden for so long? Stay with to know. When Elvis and Brown crossed paths. In the mid-1960s, American music was in a state of transformation. Rock and roll had exploded across the country. Rhythm and blues were reshaping popular sound, and soul music was emerging as the powerful voice of Black America. Yet behind the electrifying performances and screaming crowds, society was still deeply divided. Segregation laws might have been challenged, but racial boundaries remained strong. Audiences were still separated in many clubs, and artists often walked a thin line between fame and prejudice. In this world of tension and change, two legends stood at the top of their respective worlds: Elvis Presley, hailed as the king of rock and roll, and James Brown, crowned the godfather of soul. Their first meeting would happen in 1966 at a Jackie Wilson concert in Hollywood. It was a night filled with excitement and anticipation. George Klein, one of Elvis's closest friends, played a key role in introducing the two icons. James Brown was already at the venue, surrounded by his entourage, exuding his usual confidence and style. When Elvis and Priscilla arrived, Klein offered to bring Brown to their table, but Elvis shook his head and said, "Take me to James." That single line revealed the respect Elvis had for Brown. In a time when racial divides shaped the music industry, the king of rock and roll chose to walk across the room to greet the godfather of soul. The moment they met, something clicked. Brown had long admired Elvis's stage energy and charisma, while Elvis deeply respected Brown's rhythm, dance, and unmatched control over his audience. They were both self-made men who rose from poverty to superstardom, and that shared struggle gave them an instant connection. Elvis complimented Brown on his showmanship, and Brown responded by calling Elvis one of the hardest-working performers he had ever seen. For two men who had changed the sound of American music, that night marked the beginning of an unusual friendship, one rooted in mutual respect rather than rivalry. Over time, their bond grew stronger. Brown would sometimes visit Elvis at Graceland, and when schedules allowed, they would speak on the phone. The two often shared stories about fame, family, and faith. But their friendship was not without unspoken tension. Elvis was constantly scrutinized for his image as a white performer who made black music popular. Brown, on the other hand, carried the weight of being a symbol of black pride and empowerment. Beneath the laughter and mutual admiration, there was an awareness of the racial and cultural barriers they could never fully escape. Elvis admired Brown's power to move people. Brown admired Elvis's ability to unite audiences across color lines. Yet they rarely discussed these deeper issues directly. Both men carried secrets, doubts, and pressures that fame only magnified. For Brown, Elvis's guarded nature sometimes made him wonder what burdens the king was hiding behind his smile. For Elvis, Brown's energy and independence were both inspiring and intimidating. They appeared to be friends, but behind closed doors, what Brown witnessed about Elvis would haunt him for decades. Let's reveal their secret confidences. Private confidences and gospel nights. James Brown's relationship with Elvis Presley was unlike any other celebrity friendship of that era. While many stars could only dream of being invited to Graceland, Brown had something rare, personal access to the king himself. Whenever he was in Memphis, Brown sometimes called Graceland without notice, and surprisingly, Elvis would tell his staff to let him in. This kind of privilege was almost unheard of, considering how private Elvis's world had become during the later years of his life. Most people only saw the performer on stage or the legend in magazines. Brown, however, saw the man behind the fame. Inside the grand estate, away from reporters and fans, the two icons often found peace through music. What bonded them most was not their success, but their shared love for gospel. Late at night, when the house grew quiet, Elvis would sit at his piano and start singing old gospel hymns he learned as a child. Brown would join in, his deep, soulful voice blending perfectly with Elvis's smooth tone. For hours, they would lose themselves in songs about faith and redemption. It was their escape from fame, from pressure, from the world that constantly demanded more from them. People close to Elvis said these nights revealed his truest self. He laughed freely, sometimes cried softly, and spoke openly about his faith. Brown later described these moments as deeply spiritual, saying Elvis was not acting like a superstar, but a man searching for peace. Music connected them on a level far beyond performance. It was not about impressing an audience, it was about healing a restless heart. During these private visits, Elvis began to trust Brown with thoughts he rarely shared with anyone else. He talked about his exhaustion from the endless tours, the pressure to live up to his public image, and his growing fear that he was losing control of his own life. Brown listened quietly, sometimes giving advice, sometimes just sitting in silence. He had seen the same struggles in his own life, the weight of fame, the loneliness of being admired by millions, but truly known by none. Elvis also spoke of regrets. He wished he had more time for simple things, family, friends, peace. He feared being remembered only as an entertainer and not as a person who loved deeply and believed strongly. Brown felt compassion for him, but also a quiet sadness. He sensed that Elvis was carrying secrets and burdens far heavier than anyone imagined. There were moments when Elvis's words hinted at things he didn't want made public. Brown understood the risk of revealing too much. Over time, they made an unspoken agreement. What was said in those private nights would remain between them. Elvis often reminded Brown to stay silent about certain struggles, and Brown honored that request, even after Elvis's death. From gospel nights to private confessions, Brown had heard things that could rewrite Elvis's story, but the real bombshell was yet to come. The death of Elvis and Brown's hidden witness. By the summer of 1977, Elvis Presley was not the unstoppable force the world once knew. Behind the flashing lights, sold-out shows, and perfect smiles lay a man trapped in his own fame. His health was in sharp decline, his body weakened by years of prescription medication, sleepless nights, and mounting stress. James Brown, who had been close to him for years, sensed the change long before the headlines appeared. He noticed the spark fading from Elvis's voice, the heavy look in his eyes that even makeup could not hide. In interviews, Brown would later say that he felt something was coming, as if Elvis was fighting battles that no one could see. When news of Elvis's death broke on August 16, 1977, Brown was devastated. He had just finished a performance when a member of his crew whispered the words that froze him. The king was gone. Brown didn't believe it at first. He called Memphis, trying to reach someone at Graceland. When it was confirmed, he sat in silence for a long time, tears welling in his eyes. For him, Elvis wasn't just a fellow musician. He was a brother in soul and spirit. When the funeral was arranged, thousands tried to attend, but only a handful of people were allowed near the coffin. Brown was one of them. He personally requested permission to see Elvis one last time, and to the surprise of many, he was allowed in. Witnesses later described how Brown stood motionless before the open coffin, trembling as he looked down at his old friend. For several minutes, he said nothing. Then, overwhelmed, he began to cry openly. The man known as the Godfather of Soul broke down completely. He later said that moment changed him forever. But according to Brown, something about what he saw that day didn't feel right. He quietly told close friends that the Elvis in the coffin looked different. He noticed small things that didn't match his memories: the hairline, the skin tone, even the shape of the hands. These subtle details troubled him deeply. Brown didn't publicly accuse anyone or challenge the official report, but his private remarks suggested he doubted the full story of how Elvis died. Over the years, Brown carried that doubt like a secret burden. He believed there were hidden facts, possibly covered up to protect Elvis's image or shield those around him. Some close to Brown even hinted that he had been warned not to speak publicly about certain details. The loyalty he felt toward his friend kept him silent for decades, but inside, the truth kept pulling at him. As he aged, especially after turning 73, Brown began to reflect on his own legacy. He wondered if staying silent was truly honoring Elvis, or if it was betraying the man who once trusted him with his deepest fears. That thought haunted him more than anything else. He began hinting in interviews that there was more to Elvis's death than the world had been told. He was ready to speak, but only when he felt the world was prepared to listen. After Elvis's death, Brown claimed he witnessed something that the world would never see until now. The hidden truth. Brown finally reveals. When James Brown finally decided to break his silence, the world wasn't ready for what he had to say. After years of holding back, he revealed that much of what people believed about Elvis Presley was only half the truth. Brown claimed that behind the fame, the gold records, and the screaming fans was a man burdened by fear, guilt, and loneliness. He said Elvis was misunderstood, not just as an artist, but as a human being. According to Brown, the king of rock and roll never saw himself as a king. He was just a man trying to survive in a world that demanded perfection from him every single day. Brown described Elvis as a soul brother, a phrase he used deliberately. In a rare interview, he said, "There'll never be another like that soul brother." For Brown, that wasn't just a compliment. It was a defense. He wanted the world to see the man he saw, someone who respected black music, who learned from it, who loved it deeply, and who never meant to steal or diminish it. Brown insisted that Elvis had a genuine passion for gospel and rhythm and blues, that he wept when listening to Mahalia Jackson, and that he often said his biggest regret was not being able to publicly share his struggles with faith and identity. In another emotional interview, Brown said, "I love him and hope to see him in heaven." Those words carried more weight than they seemed to. For Brown, they were not only about friendship, but they were also about forgiveness. He wanted to clear the air around the long-standing racial tensions that often surrounded Elvis's legacy. Many accused Elvis of cultural appropriation, but Brown countered that he saw only love and respect in how Elvis approached the music. He admitted they had their differences, but said that the bond they shared in private, especially during those gospel nights, proved Elvis's sincerity. Brown backed up his statements with stories that few others could tell. He spoke of nights when Elvis confided that fame had become a curse. "He told me once," Brown revealed, "that the hardest part wasn't losing privacy. It was losing trust." Elvis feared that everyone around him wanted something. Brown's memories of those conversations gave a glimpse into Elvis's fragile side. A man trapped in his own image, surrounded by people but profoundly alone. Still, not everyone believed Brown's account. Critics accused him of exaggerating, of romanticizing their friendship to protect his own image. Biographers argued that there was no record of some of his claims, while others said that Brown's loyalty clouded his judgment. Yet many who knew both men, musicians, producers, and close friends, quietly admitted that Brown's version made sense. They had all seen glimpses of that hidden Elvis, the one who smiled for the cameras but prayed for peace when the lights went out. The implications of Brown's confession rippled through the music world. Historians were forced to reconsider how they viewed Elvis, not just as a cultural icon, but as a man caught between two worlds, the white mainstream and the black roots of the music he loved. Fans who once saw him as distant began to understand his deeper struggles. Brown's words reshaped Elvis's legacy, turning him from a legend into something far more human. But truth rarely comes without consequence. Brown's statements triggered a storm of backlash. The backlash and hidden forces. Within hours of his interview airing, headlines blazed across tabloids and entertainment networks. James Brown claims to know Elvis's real truth. The world was stunned. For decades, Elvis's image had been carefully protected by his estate and family. But Brown's words cracked open a door that many thought would remain sealed forever. Elvis's former wife, Priscilla Presley, reportedly responded with shock and sadness. She maintained her respect for Brown, but insisted that some of his statements were misremembered or misunderstood. Lisa Marie Presley, Elvis's daughter, was more private, but was said to have felt that Brown was speaking from emotion, not fact. The Presley estate quickly released a short statement praising Brown's career, but cautioning fans against taking unverified personal memories as historical truth. Biographers and historians were divided. Some dismissed Brown's words as dramatized memories from an aging star. Others said his friendship with Elvis gave him a unique, credible insight that should not be ignored.
Elvis Presley and James Brown were very good friends. James Brown said, "I wasn't just a fan, I was his brother. We never argued about anything. We always got along."
Still, not everyone stood against him. A few insiders, former backup singers, musicians, and staff members from Graceland began speaking quietly to journalists. Some confirmed parts of Brown's story, particularly about Elvis's loneliness and spiritual struggles. Others said they remembered nights when Brown visited Graceland and how the two men would sit for hours just talking or singing gospel. These voices, though few, gave weight to Brown's claims and made the controversy even more complicated. The storm took a toll on Brown himself. Friends said he was torn between relief and regret. He had finally spoken his truth, but the cost was heavy. His health began to decline under the stress, and he often confided that he wished people could understand that his motive wasn't scandal, it was love. He said once, "I wanted people to see Elvis the way I did, a man of heart, not hype." But the world, divided between adoration and disbelief, made that vision almost impossible. By the end of the ordeal, Brown's reputation had been bruised, though not destroyed. Some saw him as a brave truth-teller, others as a legend chasing relevance. But one thing was clear: he had started a conversation that could no longer be silenced. Behind the public denials and legal letters, there were forces at work, determined to keep certain truths buried. As Brown's health weakened and his days grew quieter, one question lingered in the air. Had he said enough to change how the world saw Elvis? Or would his truth fade like so many unheard confessions in music history? Legacy, redemption, and what the truth demands. In many ways, Brown's own journey mirrored Elvis's. Both were Southern men shaped by poverty, faith, and the fire of fame. Both struggled with demons that success could not silence. And both, in the end, sought redemption. Elvis through gospel, Brown through truth. When Brown turned 73, he spoke with quiet conviction about his decision to reveal what he knew. "I didn't want to hurt him," he said softly. "I wanted to set him free." Those close to him recalled that even in his final years, Brown kept a picture of Elvis in his home studio. Sometimes he would play a gospel tune they once sang together and simply whisper, "We did good, brother." As time passed, Brown's words sparked a wave of reflection. Documentaries, podcasts, and books began revisiting their friendship, exploring how two men from different worlds shared a single heartbeat for music and faith. Fans began to see their connection not as controversy, but as communion. Younger generations, raised on digital myths, were moved by the reminder that heroes are human too, that behind every legend lies a fragile soul trying to make sense of love, loss, and legacy. Yet even amid growing acceptance, some questions never faded. Did Brown tell everything? Were there deeper secrets he chose to keep, either out of loyalty or fear? Those who listened closely to his interviews sensed hesitation, small pauses, half smiles, words left unsaid. Perhaps some truths were too personal, too sacred, to be spoken aloud. What Brown's revelation ultimately demanded was not blind belief, but introspection. It challenged fans to look beyond the glitter of celebrity and face the price of myth-making. It reminded us that every story, even one as golden as Elvis Presley's, carries shadows that history often hides. Brown's courage to speak, however imperfectly, gave permission for those shadows to be seen. In the end, as James Brown reflected on his life and friendship with Elvis, he seemed at peace. He had spoken his truth. Whether the world accepted it or not was no longer his burden. "The man I knew," he once said, had more soul than the world will ever know. And with that, the godfather of soul left behind not just music, but a mirror. One that forces us to ask what truth really means when the legend is larger than life. What do you think? Did he tell everything, or does one final secret still lie in the shadows? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe.